Shalom, I'm Eddie Chumney of Hebraic Heritage Ministries, and we welcome you to this week's Focus Israel Report. In this week's report, we're going to be sharing with you regarding the current status of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process and the current situation with Syria and Iran. The current situation with the peace process is as follows. Former U.S. President Jimmy Carter has called on the European Union to start labeling Israeli products from the West Bank, saying, "With the Middle East process making no significant progress, we call on Europe to play a stronger and more significant role in revitalizing peace efforts with a fresh approach." The European Union has repeatedly condemned settlement expansion in the West Bank. It could therefore introduce a clear labeling of products made in Israeli settlements, which are illegal under international law, said Carter. It appears as if Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ordered a construction freeze in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Israel's housing minister Uri Ariel said that he was summoned by Netanyahu, who handed him a freeze order for all construction beyond the Green Line, which is the land captured by Israel in the June 1967 war. On orders from Netanyahu, the construction of 1,500 apartments in an East Jerusalem neighborhood of Ramat Shlomo is being held up by the Interior Ministry because the project is being deemed as being too sensitive. The construction of the apartments was announced in May 2010 during a visit to Israel by U.S. Vice President Joe Biden. The Fatah Central Committee, whose members consist of the Palestinian sect of Mahmoud Abbas, has accepted the Arab League's recent proposal authorizing land swaps with Israel. Fatah's leaders stressed after their meeting, however, that they perceived the idea as meaning that there would be minor and mutual adjustments to the future border between Israel and a Palestinian state. Accepting the idea does not mean legitimizing settlement blocks in the West Bank. Settlements in all the Palestinian lands are illegal. There can be no land swaps without an Israeli recognition of an independent and sovereign Palestinian state on the 1967 borders, they said. Hassam al-Ahmed, a senior Fatah official, said that the Palestinians were awaiting a full diplomatic process to revive the peace talks. He said U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry was expected to announce the results of his current efforts to resume peace talks between Israel and the Palestinians on June the 7th. "This is the date that we have agreed upon," Ahmed said. Rival Palestinian political factions Fatah and Hamas met in Cairo, Egypt, and agreed to form a national unity government within the next 3 months. Fatah official Assam al-Ahmed said both sides agreed on a timetable that begins with creating laws to govern the next elections. The two parties signed a reconciliation deal in 2011, but it has not yet been implemented. Israel and the Palestinian Authority tried to conduct back-channel negotiations, or at least initiate them, in late 2010 and early 2011 in a series of secret meetings between the Prime Minister's envoy, attorney Yitzhak Molko, and the head of the PLO Executive Committee, Yasser Abed Rabo. Abed Rabo said he and Netanyahu met for 2.5 hours in mid-February 2011 and mentioned but did not negotiate over various final status issues, including borders, Jerusalem, and refugees. Abed Rabo had a meeting with Netanyahu at the house of Yitzhak Molko, where Netanyahu seemed ready to renew negotiations within the framework of two states based upon the June 4, 1967 borders. However, there has been no further contact since that meeting, Rabo said. There were a series of meetings beforehand, I'd say 10, between me and Molko. The meetings were held in Jerusalem. We discussed all the issues. I sat and demanded in those meetings that Israel present its map for a two-state solution and publicly declare its willingness to speak about the 1967 lines as the framework for the meetings. Molko was not prepared to present a map. They were kept secret until now. The only ones who knew about them on the Palestinian side were Mahmoud Abbas and Salam Fayyad, the Palestinian Prime Minister. Saeb Erekat, the head of the Palestinian negotiating team, was not in the know regarding these discussions. Instead of a map, Abed Rabo went on, Molko was willing to include a military official in the meetings, a map expert who would present Israel's security demands to me. Molko emphasized in the meetings the importance of the Jordan Valley, settlement blocks, and early warning stations on West Bank mountains. I ruled this option out. He claimed that he wanted to show me these considerations on a map, but I told him that Israel's security concerns are not a starting point. It's a non-starter, and under the pretense of security, you can claim anything. I made it clear that first of all, we need to agree to speak about the 1967 lines and then start debating security issues, or even both in parallel. These meetings were not documented. At a certain point, I said to Molko that if they agreed to the 1967 framework, we can talk about limited land swaps and security arrangements. From our standpoint, it was possible to discuss borders and security issues, but it cannot be that security considerations would determine the borders. In the background, the Arab Spring began to gain momentum, and we also spoke about it quite a bit. In one of the last meetings, Molko said to me, I can't give you an answer on the approach you presented, meaning first recognition that a peace agreement would be based upon 1967 borders with agreed land swaps, then discussions of security considerations. I will propose to the Prime Minister that you meet, and if you can manage to reach an understanding, then that is something else entirely. Only the Prime Minister can take it from here, Molko said. Abbo went on to explain that the meeting with Netanyahu did indeed take place. It stretched on for about 2.5 hours. He spoke about 3,000 years of Jewish history. I said to him that speaking about 3,000 years of Jewish history will not get us anywhere. I care about what is now and what was 60 years ago. Netanyahu spoke about how vital the Jordan Valley was for Israel's security and noted the possibility that Iranian tanks could cross the Jordan. I explained that this won't get us anywhere. In the meeting, he didn't mention that Israel as the Jewish nation-state issue. I said to him that I was in the secret talks with Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, and he showed us a map of a peace agreement. We were ready for land swaps of 1.9%, but Olmert wanted the swap to be 6.4%. That's what we arrived at. We could start the conversation from here. I spoke to him about Jerusalem and about the refugees. In the end, I said to him, if you want to start something serious, if you agree to the 1967 borders as a basis, including East Jerusalem as the capital of a Palestinian state, then we can talk about the other things. He asked if we were ready to start negotiations immediately. I said yes. He asked who would be in the Palestinian delegation for the negotiations, and I told him that if he agrees to the principle I presented him, I would need about a 5-minute telephone call, and I would return to him with the names. He turned to Molko and said to him, you lead the Israeli delegation along with the 2 others. You know who I'm speaking of. He asked me if these were all of our demands, and I said yes. He agreed that we needed a convenient place to speak, a secluded place where talks would be conducted that could last between 2 weeks and 2 months. He asked me to prepare the Palestinian delegation, and I asked him if he agreed with what I had proposed. He said to me, give me 2 days and I'll get back to you. We said goodbye. He asked me to send his regards to Mahmoud Abbas, and from that point on, I didn't hear from Netanyahu or Molko. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry will be in Israel and the Palestinian territories on May the 23rd and 24th to try to restart direct peace talks between Israel and the Palestinians. Finally, the Temple Institute presented for the first time blueprints to rebuild the temple. It included the Sanhedrin Assembly Hall, the Chamber of Hewn Stone, and part of the Holy Temple complex itself. These plans were drawn up by a top Israeli architectural firm hired by the Temple Institute. The plans represent the first stage in the drawing up of comprehensive architectural plans for the entire Holy Temple complex. Regarding Syria, the situation is as follows. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Iran must take part in a proposed international conference to end Syria's civil war, but that Western states wanted to limit the participants and possibly predetermine the outcome of the talks. He said, among some of our Western colleagues, there is a desire to narrow the circle of external participants and begin the process from a very small group of countries in a framework which, in essence, would predetermine determine negotiating teams, agenda, and maybe even the outcome of talks. One must not exclude a country like Iran from this process because of geopolitical preferences. Iran is a very important external player, but there is no agreement on this issue yet. Meanwhile, Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with Russian President Vladimir Putin to try to prevent him from selling a supply of advanced Russian anti-air S-300 missile systems to Syria. Netanyahu told Putin that if the S-300 was sold to Syria, that it was likely to cause a response by Israel which could send the region into war. The S-300 is designed to shoot down planes and missiles at 200-kilometer ranges. They could be used to down Israeli Air Force planes trying to strike military targets in Syria and Lebanon. Putin is therefore placing a severe constraint on Israel's operational freedom by spreading an anti-air missile cover over the Syrian, Hezbollah, and the Iranian military group who is fighting to keep Bashar Assad in power. Another reason why Russia is selling the S-300 missile system to Syria is that Russia wants to try to discourage Western military intervention in Syria. This is not the only thing that Russia did to show its support for Assad of Syria. In a move considered aggressive by U.S. and European officials, Russia has sent at least 12 warships to patrol waters near its naval base in Tartus, Syria. Russia's increased presence in the region represents one of its largest sustained naval deployments since the Cold War, as this is regarded as a show of force and muscle flexing. Furthermore, Russian Navy Admiral Viktor Cherkov said that the process is underway for creating a permanent staff to run Russian fleet operations in the Mediterranean Sea. He said a staff of 20 officers were already in place. The Russian Mediterranean deployment would comprise 5 to 6 warships and their service vessels, as well as possibly nuclear submarines which may be armed with nuclear ballistic missiles. Russia also sold advanced anti-ship cruise missiles to Syrian President Bashar Assad. These missiles are outfitted with an advanced guidance system that makes them more effective than the older version of the missile Russia sold to Syria. These missiles will allow Syria to thwart any attempt by international forces to reinforce Syrian rebels by imposing a naval embargo or a no-fly zone. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that arms deals with Syria do not violate international agreements. Next, I'd like to share with you the current situation with Iran, and it is as follows. Iran's chief nuclear negotiator, Saeed Jalili, said that Iran does not recognize Israel as a state or the red line determined by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu when he spoke before the United Nations in the fall of 2012. He said that Iran will continue to resist the demands of the international community to halt production of 20% enriched uranium and insisted the Islamic Republic only wants to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes under the rights granted in the United Nations Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Meanwhile, the United Nations Nuclear Agency, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, failed to persuade Iran to let it resume an investigation into suspected atomic bomb research, leaving the issue in a deadlock. IAEA Deputy Director General Herman Nachertz said that after an 8-hour meeting that they had intense discussions with Iran, but did not finalize the structured approach document that has been under negotiation for a year and a half. Our commitment to continue dialogue with Iran is unwavering. However, we must recognize that our best efforts have not been successful so far, so we will continue to try and complete this process. At some point, the Director General of the IAEA will have to return to the UN Security Council and say to them, "I cannot go any farther. There has been no agreement with Iran." So the UN Security Council needs to take further action. U.S. Undersecretary of State Wendy Sherman told lawmakers in the United States that this could happen in June or September. No date has been set for further talks between Iran and the IAEA. So this is going to conclude the report for this week. Until we do it again, Shalom in Yeshua the Messiah. Amen.